Looking at the list of your topics in this course, I understand that you were mostly looking inwards at the U.S. democracy. Today we'll talk a little bit more about democracy outside the U.S., democracy in societies in transition, as they are referred to, and the relationship between political democratization and some other very important processes, such as state and nation building. Let's look first of all at the modern map of Europe. You see lots of countries that did not exist yet 30 years ago. If we go now to this map, we would see an absolutely different Europe. You can see the center of Europe and its eastern periphery were controlled by four giant empires. Within these empires, people were subjects of these crowns and not citizens of those empires. We define empire as a political entity in which there is a clearly distinct center and the periphery. This distinction can be based on ethnicity, religion, race, language, some other factors. And the core of empire, its center, is ruling the periphery using non-democratic means. The paradox is that within empires, the core can be democratic in regard to its own citizens, but it still governs the periphery in non-democratic manner. So 1913, the last year before World War I, all major countries of Europe go to this war, and out of this war, all four great empires of Europe, continental empires, I'll return to it in a second, the Ottoman Empire, Russian Empire, German Empire, Austria-Hungary, whichever side they were on, fall apart. And formed are numerous nation states, at least in name. We'll return to that term a little bit later. And there pops up this map. It's the same period. Anyway, there emerged new countries that did not exist at all or existed for a brief period of time before. Poland, once a great empire of Europe itself. Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Yugoslavia, initially a kingdom of the Serbs, Croats, and Slovens, then Yugoslavia, and a number of others. And then there comes World War II, and we get what we've seen initially. There emerges a different already map, and then we get to a map that emerges more or less in 1991, after the fall of the Soviet Union. So numerous states pop up, and most of them claim to be nation states. We'll return to this definition a little bit later. And this means that when these countries start to transit from the communist rule to a democracy, they have to deal with many more problems than, say, countries in Western Europe. First, their emergence has been delayed by the fact that there were parts of multi-ethnic empires before. And more than that, they were the peripheral parts of these empires, say Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova. They all were the westernmost parts of the Russian Empire and then the Soviet Union. States in the Balkans for a long time were the peripheral parts of the Ottoman Empire, and then many of them were parts of Yugoslavia. Also a multi-ethnic, communist state. And therefore, they have to deal with a number of major challenges during their transition. They have to move from a planning system to a market system in the economic sphere. They have to move from guaranteed employment, guaranteed by the state, to a labor market. In political sphere, they have to choose a particular type of political system. What do they want to be? Constitutional monarchy, presidential republic, parliamentary republic, presidential parliamentary republic, and so on. What kind of electoral system do they want to have? Do they want to use, say, American-style plurality system, or more European-style PR system, proportional representation system? Then they have to decide what do they want to do in the political ideological sphere. Communist states were not only controlling the political space, but they had a single, monopolistic ideology, the communist ideology. Now you have to move to a pluralist society, and the big question, how do you do it? So if you looked at the names of those countries, those that existed before 1991, they would be called Polish People's Republic, the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republic, German Democratic Republic. So they all, these titles, including some kind of ideological element. These countries now become Polish Republic, Romania, Republic of Romania, and so on and so forth. So they remove these ideological definitions from their names. But how about real politics? How should they deal with this issue? And in addition to those problems that are typical for all societies in transition, most of those countries had to deal with the issue, what kind of state are we? Are we claiming to be a nation state of one nation? Or do we want to declare that we guarantee equality and we recognize that we are multi-ethnic societies? Let's look now at a couple of tables here. These are the ethnic compositions of population in the former Soviet republics during the USSR existence. You can see that in the USSR in general, 50.8% of the population were ethnic Russians. That means that practically the same share belonged to people who were not ethnic Russians. They belonged to other nationalities. In Russia itself, the share of Russians was 81.5%. Right now it's about 77%. So it's much higher than in the USSR. Ukraine, close to a quarter of the population were ethnic Russians. It already tells you a little bit about the challenges that Ukraine has encountered when it became an independent state. Well, so what's in practice? 1991, the Soviet Union falls apart. There's a tremendous enthusiasm all over the world. Fukuyama writes that it's the end of history. He means now everybody would recognize democracy, would recognize market, and basically it would guarantee a kind of unification of the world, stability in development, and the fact that we would avoid any conflicts. Samuel Huntington, another very popular theorist of that time, yet in the 1970s publishes a book that is called The Third Wave. Have you heard about Huntington? Some of you have heard, yeah? So Huntington basically said, everybody would accept democracy, but it would take time. he uses many Weberian ideas and basically says the first states that accept, the first societies that accepted political market democracy were Protestant societies. They were built religious communities from the bottom upwards. They accepted religious freedom, they accepted market in the economic sphere, and they were the first ones to accept competition in the political sphere. They were followed by the second wave. So Confucian societies harder for them because they accept the idea of hierarchy, but they accepted it. Judaic society in Israel accepted it. Then they came, and that's when Huntington was writing, the time of Catholic societies. Yeah, highly hierarchical, but still they do accept this idea now. And they will be followed by the others. The Orthodox would accept it. The Buddhists, others. The last probably would be Muslim societies because they don't accept many elements of economic market. Say gambling, interest rate, and so on. But they will be there. And then 10 years passed, and he published the next book that he called The Clash of Civilizations. And in it he said, no, not so easy. Ideology is dead. But the thing is, ideology is something that people learn consciously. They learn it through reading, through talking to the others, and ideology can be changed. People can switch, say, from fascism to communism, from communism to democracy, and so on. But ideology is dead, and in its stead, there would come a much deeper division. It would be much deeper because it is something that is learned in early childhood, and it's a subconscious act. What would be the foundation of this new divide? What do you think he meant? He said the world would fall apart in about 10 civilizations based on religion, because religion is learned subconsciously, and this is something you cannot change. You can formally switch, but religion creates a moral code that sits very deeply, and therefore he said conflict in the 21st century would be much deeper and much bloodier than anything that happened in the 20th century, ironically. And there was a very strong backlash. People said there is a pretty clear correlation between particular religions and particular ethnic, cultural, racial groups, and it is very deterministic. But, that was his idea. Meanwhile, we see that numerous states have emerged. They started to face challenges, and if we look at the most rudimentary level, say the economy, Marx, when he wrote his works, he explained very well to his followers why capitalism was bad. He didn't explain how socialism, as a first phase of communism, would work. And his followers started to twist his theory in various ways. Lenin said, contrary to Marx's logic, revolution would win not in the highest developed country of the world, but in a country with the deepest contradictions. He wanted to justify why he would take power in Russia. So he said maybe Russia, maybe East Germany, maybe Austria-Hungary, maybe Turkey, maybe some country in Asia. And, finally the Bolsheviks took power in 1917. Then Lenin dies, and there is a struggle for power, but also struggle in regard how to proceed. And contrary to Marx's predictions, again, revolution did not spread. Russia remained the only communist country, but communism there has survived. And two leaders of the party said, we need to survive. How? Stalin said, we have to build high walls around us, avoid conflicts, build modern industry, and on this basis build modern military. And then, in a number of generations, we'll see what happens. And Trotsky said, no, the only way to survive is to export the revolution. So let's provoke wars with neighboring countries. Let's provoke internal conflicts in capitalist states. And Stalin, for a number of reasons, including personal ones, has won. And his model of socialism in one country won along with Stalin. And based on this model, socialism first developed in a very cruel form in the Soviet Union, and then it was imposed on a number of countries in Eastern Europe and in some other regions of the world. So here comes 1991, and the Soviet Union loses its satellites in Eastern Europe. They become independent. But this is not the only process that takes place. Second process was the dissolution of all ethno-federal states that existed in the area. So the Soviet Union falls apart into 15 newly independent states. Czechoslovakia peacefully gets divided into the Czech and Slovak republics. And then Yugoslavia also starts to fall apart into numerous small ethnic states. And how does it look in practice? First of all, economic transition. What do you do? In the communist countries, there was one mechanism of coordination and information about the economy. It was called plan. In the capitalist systems, what acts as a mechanism for coordination of economic activity and for receiving information about the value of particular good? How is it called? We use it every day. It is called, yeah?
Money, market.
Market, sure, market. So I bake bread. Somebody, Emma for instance, makes, I don't know, moonshine in the evening at a marketplace, and we find out a couple of things. First, we find out whether anybody wants my bread or Emma's moonshine, yeah? Whether they have consumer value. If they have consumer value, they also have value. You can exchange the results of your work and get what you need. And then there pops up another mechanism that is called money. So there is an intermediary now. So Marchi, for instance, buys from me my bread and sells to Emma. So makes money basically according to Marx out of thin air, doesn't take part in the process. And if you decide to do something, say you want to produce chairs, you hire labor, you rent a building, you buy resources, you probably take a loan, and only after you produce these chairs, you try to sell them on an open market. And you find out whether somebody wants to buy these chairs. And Marxist theorists said, no, this is horrible. It's a tremendous waste of resources. You can produce something that nobody wants. There can happen a situation when 2 or 3 people produce the same goods. Again, it's a waste of resources. So we'll do everything the other way. A state will give an order to somebody, a manager. It would give this manager everything she needs. Building, labor, resources, money. But it would guarantee that it buys everything, the plant that this person manages, at a fixed price. So what a great system. There is no waste of anything. Everything is preordained before. And we will decide what the price will be. And they created this system. The system had one very important handicap, because prices were totally artificial. They had nothing to do with supply and demand. Some items immediately became in a short supply, something were overproduced, and the first of these situations has led to a tremendous corruption and to the formation of market within the planned economy societies. So people were still selling and buying goods at real price. And then there comes the period of democratization, the period of transition. So again, how should you do it? And there popped up two approaches. One was called shock therapy. It was pursued by such economists as, for example, Jeffrey Sachs. You will probably have heard about him because he is actively involved in elections right now. And Anders Osland from Sweden and some others. They said you cannot move from plan to market in an easy way. Therefore, you have to jump. You have to create real shock for economy and for society. How? You freeze people's salaries, you freeze bank accounts, you freeze all social spending, and what happens? Enterprises start firing people, people lose their savings, and it's tough. Enterprises are allowed to introduce any prices they want now. There are no price controls. So prices would go through the roof, and it would be very tough for people. But it would force millions or tens of millions of people to go and look for new ways to earn money. So university professors sitting on a fixed salary would have to go and sell something. Try to play the difference of prices. There would pop up the so-called shuttles who would say, buy in Murfreesboro, sell some these local goods, say in Kentucky, buy something in Kentucky, bring here, and this way, very quickly there would pop up market essentially in an economic desert. Plus, if prices go through the roof, somebody would start jumping in, producing goods on their own. Yeah, this would be shady goods, but they would be much cheaper. And this way, within months, we would have a market economy, and we would have millions of people working already within this market space in a situation when everybody was a state employee just recently. And, we would have real prices for the first time in many decades. But there's a second problem. Okay, all the economy belonged to, the state in a communist country. What would you do with this economy? How would you deal with it? And in many countries, there popped up an idea of vouchers. Let us calculate everything that exists in a country and divide this sum on a number of people who are citizens of a country and give them checks, give them vouchers. So their entitlement to a part of the socialist property. That was one approach. Another approach said, okay, let's return property to the former owners. Well, practically impossible in the Soviet Union. 75 years have passed, and Bolsheviks took care about most of the owners and even their heirs. In Poland, they said, no, we will return property to the owners with one caveat. We will not return anything to Germans who owned this property before. Why? Because there was no Poland, remember, for a long time, for more than a century. This was Germany. This was Austria, Galicia. And they didn't want German citizens to get back their possession. But even then, they ran into a problem. For instance, Polish parliament has adopted a law on return of property, and then they realized that the very building in which they were sitting, the building of parliament, previously belonged to the Radziwill princely family. Presidential palace belonged before to the Princess Radziwill. So it also was a problem. So there were different approaches in different countries in the region. Some said, let's return to previous owners. Some said, let's organize open auctions where people would exchange their vouchers to the stock of newly created stock companies. Some said, let's just give them to the former communist managers. They at least have some skills. And some said, let's give them to the workers employed at particular enterprises. So approaches were different. Poland was the only case where shock therapy was pursued in its classical form. So it was a very tough approach. Poland also introduced a second innovation. They said, when we privatize, we will rely on lustration. We will exclude from the process of privatization or from political life people who worked for the former communist regime. Lustration also was pursued in the Czech Republic on a wide scale. So what do you think? Two questions. Is lustration acceptable? So denying rights, property, and political rights to people who worked for the former communist regime. Would anybody agree with that?
No.
No. Who would agree with that? Okay. Second, in regard to privatization, who would agree with the idea that let's calculate the value of everything and give it, well, divide into a number of people living in a country and give everybody a voucher, an entitlement to a particular amount of money? Anybody? No?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Who would return to the previous owners? 1. 2. Who would give ownership to the previous managers? Okay. Who would allow privatization auctions opened to foreigners? No. Okay. So anyway, we talked about shock therapy. The second approach says, no, this is too cruel. You cannot freeze people's incomes. You cannot throw basically state employees out to the street. Let's move slowly. Let's compensate people by printing additional money and continue to offer social support. Let's slowly privatize first light industry, agriculture, services, but let's retain in the state hands control over the heavy industry, for instance, the infrastructure and so on. And shock therapists, the supporters of the first approach, say, no, it would not work because you would encourage tremendous inflation. You would put different producers in different positions, and it would not be good. And I'll repeat again that Poland was the only country that consistently pursued the shock therapy approach. Others either rejected it or claimed, like Yeltsin in Russia, that they were pursuing shock therapy, but they got scared very quickly. They were afraid of social explosion. Second issue. How do you eliminate ideological monopoly? How do you develop civil society in which people can engage in activities, political activities, independence of state, if they lived within that system for, say, 70 plus, or in case of Eastern Europe, 40 plus years, and what kind of political system do you want to have? So most of them opted for various types of parliamentary or presidential parliamentary democracies. They were afraid to create too strong central executive. Only Russia opted for very strong presidential republic, and then, well, in its footsteps followed Belarus as well. Others tried to balance the power of the president and the power of parliament and executive responsible before the government. And here comes the most complicated issue. Say, when Poland re-emerged as an independent state in 1918, for more than a century it was divided among three great continental empires of Europe. Germany, initially Prussia, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. Well, it announced that it was a nation state. It's a kind of hypothetical construct in which the borders of a state and an area of settlement of particular nation, they overlap. In Poland, the share of ethnic Poles was 69%. Others were Germans, Jews, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Lithuanians, and similar situations emerged in all of the countries of the region, because they were peripheral parts of multi-ethnic empires before that. Well, they wanted to build nation states, but it was very hard to do for them because there were huge minority groups. When they came back in 1991 into existence, or they emerged for the first time as independent states, most of those countries wanted to take it into account. They said, yeah, we're nation states, but we are civic nation states. So people belong to our nation primarily because they accept the rules of the game, as in the United States. It's not about particular ethnic features. But practice turned out to be much more complicated. One of such complexities popped up in Ukraine. Remember, we said initially 22% of Ukraine's population were ethnic Russians. There were some other ethnic minorities. Jews were dispersed all over the region. There were 800,000 Jews living in Ukraine at that time. There were Tatars, there were, for instance, Hungarians living here, Slovaks, Poles, and so on. And besides that, different parts of Ukraine were a part of the Russian Empire and of the Soviet Union for different periods of time. This part, the left bank Ukraine, was included into yet the Russian Tsardom in 1654. While other parts, say Crimea, became part of the empire in 1783. It was a Muslim Tatar state before that. Most of these parts were included during the divisions of Poland at the end of 18th century, and when Russia took its part of Western Ukraine, it also acquired for the first time in its history a large Jewish population. You all have heard an expression, it's beyond the pale. This is the pale of settlement of Jews within the Russian Empire after that. And this part became part of Ukraine only in 1945, part of the Soviet Union and part of Ukraine. And when Ukraine became independent state, it encountered very serious problems. During the vote, this part always was voting for Russian-speaking candidates, say for president, and this part always was voting for Ukrainian-speaking candidates. And here came the next problem, and it was already related to the Western position. What to do about those countries? Initially, in 1985, in 1991, first President Bush won, and then Bill Clinton said, we have to accommodate Russia because it's a great nuclear power. So they told Yeltsin they would not admit these newly formed states into NATO and the European Union. And then by 1987, Clinton came to a conclusion that no, we have to start incorporating those countries. So in 1998, Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary, okay. Yeah, Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary were included simultaneously into NATO and the European Union. Then most other Eastern European countries were added, not all, but most of them. And at the beginning of the century, 3 former Soviet republics and also 3 former independent states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, were added to NATO and to the EU. And at that point, Putin, who already was president, said, this is it. I will not allow anybody else to join, first of all, NATO. So when Georgia tried to do it in 2008, Russia invaded Georgia and took 2 of its ethnic regions. And then, as you know, in 2014, the Russian-speaking president of Ukraine, Yanukovych, was sitting on the fence for a long time, thinking where to go, sign an agreement with the EU or sign an agreement with the so-called Eurasian Union. And when he decided that he would not sign an association agreement with the EU, there started what became known as the Maidan. Yanukovych was overthrown, and the new government took a pro-Western stance. In response to that, Putin took the Crimea and invaded this area of Ukraine, the so-called Donbass. Then, after an 8-year essentially crisis, there started the second invasion on February 24th, 2022, when larger portions of Ukraine were invaded by the Russian troops. So it is absolutely clear Putin's position is sovereignty of the post-Soviet republics is limited, and we will not allow any of them to join Western economic and political groupings. Well, last weekend, elections and the referendum took place in a small country of Moldova, and the population voted for a pro-European president and supported the idea of joining the EU. So we'll see what would happen next, even though signal from Putin was pretty clear. I see that we have about 15 minutes left, and I would probably leave it for a discussion.
Will you cut to the chase and go to, however you define democracy? Did Ukraine achieve that?
Well, Ukraine has a political system that does not correspond to its needs, I will put it this way. In a system where the country was deeply divided, you had to probably do 2 things. Because regions are very clearly ethnically and religiously defined.
Our country's very divided.
Yes, exactly, Mary. It would have been better to have an ethnic federation. See? Or at least a federation. Because these people mostly, ironically, the area where is fighting now. People there are either Russians or speak Russian as their main language.
Do they want to be a part of Russia?
They wanted to, but they don't want probably anymore, because what Putin has done has had very interesting consequences. He created a Ukrainian national identity by attacking Ukraine. So, not right now, not anymore, I would say. But I think that ethnic federation would have been much better. Second, because of its composition, Ukraine had to be a parliamentary republic with elections based on PR system, not single mandate system, to take into account this ethnic composition of the population. Neither one of that was done, and as a result, elections always were like 51 to 49, very close. That meant that in our country right now, well, there is a high chance that half of the population would say, this is not my president. There it was very explicit that the result of elections was always unacceptable to a half of a country. So it had to be a coalition government, and it had to be a parliamentary system primarily. So Ukraine was a democracy in a sense that nobody was able to establish political monopoly. So the first president was Western, second president was Eastern, third president was Western, fourth president was Eastern, and when this fourth president, Yanukovych, tried to establish political monopoly, he was overthrown. Ironically, Zelensky is also Eastern Russian speaker. But right now, as you've mentioned essentially, well, the situation has changed. Ukrainians feel that they are Ukrainians, not Eastern or Western, and Zelensky is pursuing pro-European policies. So in a sense, ironically, I'll repeat it, Putin has, contrary to his wishes and plans, created a single Ukrainian identity.
Should the United States be supporting them?
You mean Zelensky?
Mm-hmm. The war.
The war. It's complicated, and I think the U.S. establishment made its decision already. In contrast to Europeans who really remember their history and they want to help Ukraine, the U.S. increasingly thinks that China is the major opponent, and this is something Europeans have to deal with. A couple of words then about Ukrainian crisis. At the moment when the Soviet Union became independent, fell apart and Ukraine became independent, its population was 51.5 million. When Putin invaded for the first time in 2014, Ukraine lost Crimea, de facto lost Donbas. The population was 43.8 million, a decline of 8 million, huge loss of population. Right now, the population of Ukraine officially is estimated at 34 million, and unofficially between 27 and 31. Where it comes from? First, the loss of territories with population. Second, huge outmigration. Third, natural natural decline of population due to very low birth rates and high death rates. So it is a demographic catastrophe. So a decline within 30 years from 51 to, let's even take a conservative figure, 34. So the loss of 17 million, roughly 1/3 of the population. Generally, the situation continues to be very, very complicated. Now about Western assistance. Before the war, 2021, the GDP of Ukraine was exactly $200 billion a year. So Ukraine was creating a little bit less than Elon Musk owns now. One person. Ukraine, the next 2 years, has lost close to a quarter of its GDP due to the war. The West compensated it by giving roughly $270 billion. Yet, in practical terms, the industrial potential, for instance, the social infrastructure, have been lost. And here pops up a question, what to do? So,
If you could wave your magic wand, what would you do? Do we trust Vladimir Putin? Should he become our new best friend?
yeah, that's a big question. But the reality on the ground is that Ukraine would probably keep losing in military terms. And then there is this question, what's better for Ukraine, what's better for the West? So,
And Europe.
And Europe, yeah.
What's better for Europe?
At the peak of the war, mid-2022, 8 million refugees have left Ukraine. Most of them are in Europe, some have returned, but most are in Europe. That means that the majority of refugees were outside the country for 2 years or more. 80% of refugees are women, children, and old people. And statistics show that if refugees leave a country for more than a year, most of them would stay in their new places. Yeah. So the demographic crisis gets deeper. So,
Dr. Korobkov, let's just say that this war of atrophy goes on, it's bleeding Western Europe, it's bleeding the United States, and we step back. And Vladimir Putin and Russia happily claim portions of Ukraine that they would like to take over.
I
Is that
think
smart?
no, it's not smart, but I think it's most realistic scenario that Ukraine would be pressured to accept. Democracies, and that's one of the ironies, don't like long wars, even if they take place outside those democracies. So there is a clear pressure on Zelensky, probably with an idea that he should accept the situation on the ground. So accept losses that Ukraine has incurred and kind of do something face-saving, something like happened in Korea. So a temporary truce line that exists for 70 plus years.
Yeah. Well, question then, I think the boogeyman to most Americans, if I may stereotype, and this is a huge stereotype, is that Vladimir Putin will never stop there. That he would go on then, after a few years, and find another geographic area to encroach upon. That's our model, that the learned lesson from prior to World War II. What's your take on that?
It's quite possible, but he will not go here because it's NATO, even though for him these are the most interesting areas. In Latvia, at the moment of the USSR dissolution, the share of ethnic Latvians was 52%. So 48% were non-Latvians, primarily Russians. In Estonia, Russian speakers are about a third of the population, and they're located in this area adjacent to the Russian border. But this is NATO, that's too complicated. The most probable scenario is Moldova. Here also there is a so-called Transnistria, where the majority are Russians and Ukrainians. And I think the original idea was Russia sweeps all this territory, cuts off Ukraine from the sea, gets to Moldova's border, and demands this part of Moldova. It did not work out. Russian troops stay on Dnieper River, so this is under Russian control, roughly this part. Well, everything would depend on the changes at the front in the foreseeable future, within, say, the next year.
Should this impact the United States presidential election this fall?
You know, the irony is that whatever candidates say, I don't see much difference in the policies after the election. Trump would immediately give a kind of offer a bargain to both sides. He would demand the recognition of the situation on the ground in exchange for, say, economic assistance to Ukraine and the removal of sanctions against Russia. I don't think that whatever the declarations are, the policies of Harris would be much different, because it is clear that there is a kind of tiredness within the elite, and it does not really want to continue. In contrast to the US, Europeans have very long and very unpleasant historical memories. Many of you probably remember that the prelude to World War II was the demand of Hitler to return to Germany the so-called Sudetenland. And this is the so-called Munich deal of September 1938. The ethnic Germans were there in clear majority. And Hitler said, give me back the Sudetenland, it will be the end of my territorial claims in Europe.
As he said over and over again.
Yeah, and of course, Europeans remember it very well. So they are very afraid that if Putin gets what he wants, he would be encouraged to, make a new demand. But this is the fear, and the practical question is, are Europeans willing to continue to live within the current situation, and are they willing to take upon themselves the load that right now is carried by the United States, that accounts for about 2/3 of the overall assistance?
Sadly, I do not think we're going to solve world peace today in this class. But it's time. I'm going to ring the bell, and if y'all have direct questions for Professor Korobkov, please stay and ask them.